Last but certainly not least, John Miller from News Corporation, CEO Digital, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, and Rafat Ali, inimitable Rafat Ali from PaidContent, a startup that managed to get a nice exit to the Guardian Group in London, but he's still filing away like a lunatic, even though I guess he's trying to do his earnout. And
Rafat knows the true meaning of PaidContent.
He knows PaidContent, and I'll just let those guys go. We've got about 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for sticking around. We don't have a lot of time, so we're going to jump right into it. John Miller needs no introduction. He joined News Corp Digital, which at that point was still called FIM, in April, has taken the bull by the horn, so to speak, trying to simplify the structure, done layoffs, made some decisions on not moving into a bigger office, he hired a lot of new executives at MySpace, at some of the other companies, and we still don't know what MySpace is going to be. But so to start with, how is working at a media conglomerate, which was Time Warner, where you have to worry about factions of businesses, you have to look at this company versus that company and sort of figure out how to fit in versus working for a media mogul?
I can answer that.
That was a softball.
Yeah. What's awesome? I think, look, the real difference is Rupert thinks like an owner. He is an owner, obviously a very significant owner, and so the decisions are very personal because they affect him directly. It's not like he's thinking about, I'm moving on to some other job some other time. He's there as long as he can be there, and so I think he's not interested in how is it getting positioned or maybe what other people might say about it, but how does it affect his company that he long term? And so I think it's the difference of thinking like an owner versus being a professional manager.
But I mean, here's my impression of how you guys have to fall in line for Murdoch. He wakes up in the morning, does some interview, says something, and then you have to decipher what he actually means, and then all of you have to fall in line. It just seems like last week was an example, perfect example of that, where he said something about Google which nobody understood, and then now if you can explain on stage what he actually meant.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with your job description. But, yeah, we'll see, right? But if you're really asking what did he mean?
Yeah, well, actually, no, that's a serious question.
Look, I think what's going on, and I know there's been some conversations about it earlier today. I think you have, and this panel is about tensions in the media business, right? Or this discussion. And I think that's a real good framework. There are tensions right now, and this free versus paid thing is a real tension, and it's going to really play out in the next couple of years and really, I think, find its own level. And I think what you're hearing from him and from a lot of people is that there is a belief that the value of higher quality content is not being recognized on the internet in the ways that it should be and the ways that it needs to be sustainable, and that something has to happen. And I think we're in the midst of figuring out what that something is as an industry right now. I don't think the industry as we know it can exist as in a purely libertarian form where it's all free and anybody can do whatever they want with anybody's stuff. I just don't think that's sustainable. And by the way, Rafat knows some of my personal history. I've been on a version of the other side of this. I'm the guy at AOL who said, let's take this and let's make it free.
Right.
So I don't come at it with an ideology per se. I'm coming at it as this is just a practical answer that has to exist. There has to be both. And if there's not both, there's not going to be high quality stuff.
But why does the debate always end up being either or versus and? Yeah. And it also comes from your boss as well. But then it somehow just always gets either or.
Well, besides, it's more fun to talk in those terms. Right now, because there is a tension, you're trying to rally to action and to take steps in all regards. I do think, even if you look at the Wall Street Journal, there is a free layer, and the Wall Street Journal has a model that has tens of millions of people who come in and access it over the web, and it has the best, in terms of business, developed plan for paid content, digital paid content in its industry, where it has approximately 1 million subscribers to its digital content. Now, if you can call that what you will, that's what it is. And then the question is, where do you put down the line and how do you figure that out? And the journal has spent 10 years figuring that out, has a pretty, is doing really well on an operating basis. And then, then that line can be pulled in one direction or another depending on the business needs. And that's what's going, by the way, if you wanted, you could call that a freemium model, right? If you started from the place that said that's a freemium model. So you could call it that if you wanted to, or you could call it a paywall, and it's a paid model. So what I'm, in a real way, I'm trying not to get caught up in the semantics of it, but what's the right answer? How does it work? How do you make real business models that can exist? Because that's what this is about.
But when he said something about Google or blocking off Google from indexing, does that really mean that is that something on the cards, or is that something that makes sense?
Yeah, I was going to say I only have a few minutes today to talk with you because I got to go hit the button when I leave. It's just robots. As anyone from Google will tell you, it's just robots.text enter,
right.
And you're done. So part of their point is, hey, if you don't like it, hit robot.text and problem over. I think what's going on is both an expression of something's got to give, and if need be, we'll lead that. And I do think that one of the actually exciting things about being at News Corp is Rupert and News Corp generally are willing to be leaders and take positions, and I think we're willing to take whatever position is needed to support the idea that there needs to be a value associated with this kind of content.
Okay, and and we'll probably get back to it a little bit later. Speaking of on getting to MySpace, so you brought in all these executives who are brand name executives that are leading the charge. You've done one small acquisition of iLike. Yep. It seems, but from being a social media company, in general, you guys haven't been very social in terms of the plans about it. So what? Just calling it an entertainment portal, what does that mean in specifics? I mean, if you look at video, there's already Hulu, which you sit on the board of. So is that on the cards for MySpace? I mean, MySpace actually syndicates Hulu video, I think.
So let me try to go into a little bit more, and there's more to come after this, but I'll go into some things, and I'll try to put it in context. So I think there are three big things going on in the so-called new media right now. That are, if you're not paying attention to these, you're not paying attention. And this is just let's call it the consumption side, and we can talk about monetization differently. But, real time is a big deal, and it's not just Twitter. Real time is a big fundamental premise. Second is the mobile, things becoming mobile and portable. And the third, I think, is social. So I think, so first question is, does MySpace matter? Yes, it matters because it's in one of the big three areas. And that is that the net is truly becoming...
MySpace matters to the extent that AOL matters, in some senses these days.
Okay. I'm not sure I understand.
You can take whatever you want out of it.
You got to help me with that one. I'm going to talk about MySpace, however.
Go ahead, sorry.
So I think you're on one of the big things that matter, right? And so underneath it, what's going on underneath that? And I think you have a couple of different ways that socialization takes place. One is people you know. The other is people you don't know necessarily, but share an interest. And that begins to describe a lot of different activities. People you know are your friends, your peers, and how you interact with them. And sharing interests and how you follow interests and where that leads to you in terms of people is another category. And I think MySpace is focused on that latter category in particular right now. I'm not saying for all time necessarily, but right now, and someone, actually I didn't say it, but someone attributed it to me, they call it the interest net. So it was pretty good. So it's really, it's following your interests, and what does that mean as a social activity, right? Who does that lead you to in terms of people? And a big part of that is media. Because you say, what are interests that people follow? Well, music is one, games is another. So the next thing underneath that is also, how do you let people do this? And we're really going to go for a deeply open platform approach. And that's going to support not just games, but a philosophy of many different things that allows people to tie into the activity, the information, the data, and the people that are happening on MySpace. We believe in a deeper, richer way than other people have done it. And we think that's actually pretty exciting, because I think a truly open platform that allows tending towards real time and hopefully getting real time aspects to it and deep openness around the data and the activities, I think is
But
going to
then
be
MySpace
big.
was always open. It just doesn't necessarily mean that they've kept the users.
No, I don't think it was, actually. I'm going to dispute that. It really wasn't, in the sense of it didn't encourage virality, and if you were a game development company and you were trying to do an app on MySpace, it wasn't easy. It wasn't clean, it wasn't easy, and you couldn't necessarily get all the data you wanted. You couldn't get the viral aspects going in a variety of different ways. And you certainly couldn't see the activity streams underneath it. So I actually think we have a long way to go. I unfortunately think we have a long way to go.
Right.
I'm excited about getting there.
So what, in terms of a time window,
Yeah.
what do you think is the time window for MySpace to be able to turn around?
Well, I think that the real product stuff is sort of, we're quite pregnant right now. So I think over the next quarter and 2 quarters, we're going to see a lot of product roll out. Then we're going to kind of know.
Can we say that the MySpace homepage will look completely different in 2 quarters?
I'm not sure it'll look completely different. It will do completely different things, yes. I mean, I'm not saying it's, because I'm not talking about creative, UI, GUI design. But the activities that are there, I think will be fundamentally changed, yes.
So if you look at the core of MySpace, music, and I'm assuming you're also saying gaming as well at this point, or at least in the future.
Yeah, based around the platform, yes.
Firstly, in the music side, MySpace music is, structured slightly differently than the rest of MySpace. Do you think as a separate entity still makes sense?
I think that it's great to be in partnership with the music companies, even though it's certainly probably for them and certainly for us adds complications, right? Just operating complications and there are some herding cats aspects to it. But being in business with them and sitting on the same side of the table as sitting across the table, a really good thing. And
for now, all the streams are free. There was
yes.
something today that said they might start gating it a little bit. Is that?
I saw a rumor on that, but I didn't have time to look at it. Though I would say, do I think a freemium model works consistent with earlier discussions? Yes, I do. I mean, do I think so? Has that been figured out? No, it hasn't. But it's certainly something to look at. Sure.
And then so is MySpace music making real money right now?
Is it profitable? No,
yeah, real money and profit.
It's not. On an operating basis, it's getting there, but no, because of the payments due to the music companies. Yeah.
And then in terms of gaming, I assume it's a hot sector. I'm sure you've looked at some of the players that got bought as well. Is that something that you'll make acquisitions in, or you think it's organic?
First of all, I think casual games or whatever you want to call it, that's happening, particularly in these social environments. Yes, I think it is. I think it's hot. I think it's going to be around to stay. Whether it's going to stay as white hot as it is right now, I don't know.
But it seems like it's figured out a monetization model that very few others have.
Well, it's figured out an adoption model and then a monetization model to go with it.
Right.
And those usually are spaced in time. Usually you figure out how to get a product adopted, and then later you say, I'll figure out how to make money. That's like where Twitter's at, right? And even Google started that way. Whereas the game stuff those have come tightly packaged, which is great. So I think it's an area I would certainly look at, though I'm not going to be the one to pay at the peak of that.
Okay.
We'll see, right?
Right. But so video in this whole entertainment, you said interest probably is a huge part of what all of us do every day. Hulu increasingly, at least for early adopters here from US, I guess, spend a lot of time on Hulu. Firstly, where does video figure in MySpace's future plan? And secondly, how does that play with Hulu, considering that you're part of it?
Yeah, so I'll add a third, if you don't mind, which is, it used, a couple of years ago, people said YouTube was all the final answer in video. And by the way, it's a big answer. But there wasn't the thought that there could be other meaningful competitors, and Hulu showed that there could be. But I think more importantly, it did 2 other things. It may have done many other things, but it certainly did these 2. One is that it validated what I would consider to be a premium experience, i.e. a really good technical presentation coupled with really high quality content equals a great experience that people will adopt. That it proved, meaning that all video, all content is not created equal. I mean, that goes back to our earlier points. I think Hulu did that. It also, on the monetization side, validated the pre-roll. The pre-roll a few years ago was a hotly debated topic, and everyone felt, you know what, a pre-roll is a really lousy experience, and we don't like pre-rolls, and we're gonna see them go away. And you know what, Hulu, I think, had a big part to play in the validity of the pre-roll as well. So the monetization model for video. So I think Hulu's on a very strong trajectory. The partners have in the boardroom do remarkably well together in terms of large media companies.
Do you think that will stay as Comcast buys NBC?
Well, you're getting that way. I was trying to answer your other question.
I know.
I'll file that. I'll get back to it. And I think that Hulu will continue to do very well and needs to explore a variety of business models. There's been rumors around that's not new news. And it will, and has that opportunity. So
there will, always be free and there will likely be a paid version. Some part will be paid, some part will be free.
I think the first part is I would think there'd always be a free. I would think that it also needs to explore, consistent with the entirety of this discussion, other additional ways to get paid. Yeah.
Is it coming on mobile anytime soon? I don't know how close you are to that product.
I'd say less likely, but that stuff really should go to Jason,
right.
Kalar. But if Comcast is a potential acquirer of NBC, that will be interesting.
Because then the TV everywhere strategy merges with Hulu strategy, which is a completely opposite loggerheads, seemingly on, at least.
Yeah, it will be interesting because there has to be some change in the dynamic at that point. It may be for the better or whatever, but there has to be some change because you've had three large media companies who have similar interests in that regard as principal shareholders, and if that changes to two media companies and let's call it a distributor, for a distribution/content company, which is what Comcast would truly become, that will be an interesting event, and I'd look forward to knowing what that dynamic is.
So getting back a little bit to MySpace, because I think is important, are you content with MySpace being a smaller, more focused, not vertical, but at least more smaller audiences that are focused on specific things?
I think smaller than
because at this point it's losing audiences from what I understand.
So I think first it's got to stabilize at a certain point, and it's probably got to go a little lower before it does, but then it should. And am I content with that? No, I'm content with that as being where you start to do a series of other things from. But you have to get to that point, and then you can start to do a series of other things, of which I think there is a lot of opportunity. Because I think, again, this socialization trend is a deep trend. It's not just Facebook, or it's not just one other company, or just like real time is not just Twitter. I think these are real trends, and I think that there's going to be a lot of different expressions of them.
How does MySpace, or just in general News Corp Digital, where does real time figure in your scheme of things at this point?
Yeah, it's still it's not, we're not deep into that operationally, I would say, across News Corp. It's one of the things I want to champion. I've sort of been on this one since, if you remember, one of my last acquisitions at AOL was a company called Religence, which was about real-time news and information. And I think that was probably maybe late 2005, early 2006, something like that. So I've been sort of figuring this one for a while. I frankly underestimated what it really means, and didn't see things like Twitter coming. I don't think many people did. Right. But I think it is a fundamental change, and I believed in it for a while. And when you're in the news and information business, and when you're in the activity business, which is what are people doing now, that gets you, both those things gets you into real time. So I actually think, in terms of my larger News Corp role, one of the things I'd like to see me have an influence on over the next period of time is the infrastructure for News Corp that enables that across the board.
Speaking of real time and going into search, the Google deal is coming up. Are you, again, content with either taking that part in-house, because FAN is already working on a lot of that stuff, or do you cut a deal with Google or Microsoft and continue that route?
Yes. I think that's exactly right. That's exactly the question. So first off, those are the options, right? Either and it got labeled, because it was a deal with Google, it got labeled a search deal. It's actually more complex than that. It involves lots of different forms of inventory.
It also has some display from what I
Yes,
understand.
that's what I'm saying, yes. And some of that, there's two things that are going, there are three things that are going on there, actually. One is there are some real declines in traffic. That's life. Two is we have made some decisions that are to make a better user experience that send less traffic to some of those places, and that affects the economics. The third, and it's just generally, just like it is for anybody else like Facebook, this is not, the social networking environment itself, when you get into activity streams and so on, is not a great search environment, at least as it stands today. So I think we need not one answer, which is why I said yes to your question. I think there's probably a few different answers, including our own FAN, which is a Fox Audience Network company.
Can you, some people here may not know
Yeah,
exactly what
yeah.
FAN is.
So FAN was spun out of MySpace as the advertising network part. And what's interesting about FAN is that it's the #5 ad network now in terms of reach in the United States. And that's the big four: Yahoo, AOL, Google, Microsoft, and now FAN. So it's #5. And I bet you if I did that quiz anywhere, including in the United States, no one would get #5 right yet. So FAN is really moving up that way. But what it's done is take the data that exists inside a social networking environment where people are telling you all this stuff about themselves, and now is finally, it's been one of the promises for a while, but now is finally beginning to understand that information and package it in a form that can be used more broadly across the web. And so it's taking the information that people readily do, and by the way, protecting privacy and so on, readily give you in this environment over here called social networking, and making that useful to advertisers and to publishers across the web. And what you see is both, because we've recently announced deals with WPP and Omnicom, as well as obviously with many publishers to reach 160 million people now in the US. So FAN can take up a lot of the slack on the revenue side for MySpace specifically, but is a business in its own right, and one that we're pretty excited about is the next generation of this kind of stuff. It also has real-time bidding, which leads you down a path that gets you to ad exchanges. So it has that capability as well.
Moving on to the news consortium that you're working on, are there any specific commitments from other companies that you think, and is there a timeline on that?
And I'm glad you didn't call it Nulu, as some have.
New ClownCo?
What's that?
New
news.
ClownCo?
No, don't do that. I think that you'll see that in the next quarter. I think what we're seeing is
tangible
yes.
product?
Yes. A product out the door? No, not that soon. Second quarter next year.
Okay.
But you were asking commitments, so I think that's we're really in that now in a significant way, because there's a recognition. And by the way, you have people that are everywhere on the spectrum, from please, how fast can we do this because we need to do it, to boy, this is scary to me, and if we can figure out certain things, I'll take the plunge.
But what gap are you filling from a user's perspective?
I think that, so let me do it this way. I think if you just say to people, I call it the good news conversation. If you just say to people, good news, you used to get this all free, and now we're going to charge you, $20 a month. You're not going to get people to say, where do I sign? You have to offer a package of value, and I think so one of the questions is what's in that package of value. And I think that package of value includes not only access to stuff that may become more constrained, but also that there's other chances for aggregation, news aggregation sites that we're very much working on. And then there's also the ability to do it in a mobile and portable environment in some interesting ways that we haven't yet seen happen. So we think it's a package of value.
Do you see any, besides the news companies, any external investors of the type like Hulu structure?
Haven't gotten there, but we'd consider it, because again, we've had a great relationship with Providence Capital, who's in with Hulu, and I think the other partners feel the same. So we haven't gotten to that yet, but I wouldn't take it off the table.
Okay, we can take questions, and if anybody has, I don't know how they come up here, or do we have microphones? I think we have microphones. But meanwhile, I'll ask the last question. On the e-reader thing, there seems to be some confusion about what News Corp's position is in terms of what it wants to do with the newsreaders. Do you think the Amazon split, if it's not fair, which I think Murdoch has said, what is a fair split?
So I think, so I'll work backwards. On Amazon specifically, and I dislike talking about any specific company, but they're the one out there now, so I guess I will. The splits are not in the publisher's favor. We believe they should be in the publisher's and content creators' favor. And Hulu is, by the way. So, you know, we've done this in other places.
That's because they own part of it as well.
Well, but you could decide where you're making your money, which is you could make it or which, in what proportion. So, you know, we believe that the content owners should be compensated with you know, better economics than certainly we're getting today from that distributor. But there's a more, I think, somewhere that's going to get sorted out, I think, more easily than the following point, which is, I think, more important and more germane to the industry generally, which is, if you're a customer through the Kindle, as I am through the Wall Street Journal today, I pay Amazon. I don't expense it, I pay it. The Wall Street Journal doesn't know I exist. There's no customer relationship between me and the Wall Street Journal. It is only with Amazon. So the Wall Street Journal can't make me an offer and say, hey, would you like to be, you know, for X dollars a month, would you like to get your print edition, your online access, and access through the Kindle? They can't do it other than by multiple charges. Right. And they certainly don't know if I'm a subscriber or not, either way. So that seems wrong. And that really needs to get sorted through because, as you talk about consumers, that's a consumer pain point. I certainly don't want to have to pay multiple times for the same content, right. And I certainly don't want to have to do it in multiple forms. You know, credit card filling out different bills and all this kind of stuff. I would want to just say, hey, charge me a fair price. If I think it's fair, I'll sign up. And you know what? Let me get the stuff.
But do you think Apple will be the one not to hand over the data? Doesn't seem like they're.
Well, so I think so. Again, if we're talking about tensions, this is a new tension that has arisen between what are now the new forms of distributors in this industry and the let's call it the suppliers, if you will, the content suppliers. This is a different form of tension that has existed before, and you're having new entrants, right? Amazon and Apple, until a few years ago, were not content distributors. Right. They are now, and so you have a class of new distributors. And for the most part, for the purposes of this discussion, you have a lot of suppliers who look like a lot of the suppliers used to look, but you have a new tension around data, customer relationship, ability to bundle, pricing, all of that stuff that will be sorted out in my belief, next 24 months. But it exists today.
Rafat, one thing. You got a choice, 5 more minutes or questions from the audience.
Question, okay. We're going to question now.
Okay, perfect. We got microphones on the side, so go for it.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on you were talking about this tension, going back to what Rupert Murdoch mysteriously meant by his comments about Google. You said that something's got to give, and if needs be, we will lead on that. So I just wanted to understand, when you think something's going to give, what will be the final moment? And second of all, are you actually going to be able to survive without having your content on Google's search index? And if so, please could you tell me how?
You got to be a journalist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's when, how, and then what you're going to do.
Multi-part question. When? Soon. When's something I give? It's got to be soon. I mean, this is very live for everybody in the business.
Like weeks?
Oh, I don't know weeks. Months and quarters. I don't think, not months and quarters, not years, is my guess. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Well, what's going to be the tipping point? What is and how are you going to survive potentially by not having any of Murdoch's content on Google's search index?
Well, let me take the second part and work back. If you understand the traffic that comes from search engines, and this is true for all new, I believe, let me say it that way, I believe this is true for all news suppliers. The traffic that comes in from Google, which may represent a large number of uniques on a monthly basis, typically comes in to consume a specific article, let's say. Consumes that article, and more often than not, leaves. And so it is the least valuable of the traffic in terms of consumption, in terms of conversion to subscribers, and all this kind of stuff. So the economic impact is not as great as one might presume if you just looked and said X number of uniques come from search engines. So there's a difference between the economic impact and the amount of people. because they behave differently. So that's to your question of how could you survive. The answer is you can survive. Because the economic impact is not.
But then how else do you bring in new people?
So there are a number of different ways. And by the way, I don't know how many of you saw Mark Cuban's post on this, which
I don't read the whole thing.
you didn't, blogmaverick.com.
Yeah.
And he said that he thought this was very interesting because, as he put it, search engines are so 2008. And now, now it's all about, Twitter and Twitter support. You can follow the Wall Street Journal on Twitter, and you're following a brand and what it does, as opposed to just coming into an individual article. And so, same thing with interest groups and so on. And so, I think part of what's happening, this is part of the overall, thing I was talking about before, is search is important. We are also moving a little bit beyond what has been the traditional search environment, if traditional is an appropriate word. And so there are other ways to get new customers and new users. So I forget the last part of your question, but it has different impacts than I think you might anticipate. Is the point?
Hi, John.
Oh, hi, Jen. I couldn't see you there. Yeah.
Good to see you. You mentioned that you're working on a deeply open platform at MySpace.
Yes.
With all the application developer chaos that's occurring over in Facebook land, if you were to wave a magic wand and bring MySpace back into the #1 position, do you think it is the app open platform? Do you think it's the number of users? Do you think it's an advertising environment? Do you think it's content? Is it a little bit of all? And do you really mean the deeply opened where there will be a developer environment to MySpace sometime soon?
Yes, yeah. So in a sense, yes to everything you asked, but more specifically, the first two I think are the most important, if I remember them correctly, which is a deeply open platform combined with scale. I do think those two things, the interaction of those two things matter. And then the ability to apply that beyond Facebook is also important. As Rafat mentioned, we bought a company called iLike a month or so ago, which has the #1 music app on Facebook. So we don't just think in terms of the boundaries of MySpace.com. We're trying to think, how do we do things that enable developers, in this case, to do something that impacts their business as broadly as possible by having access to certain information and data, and a launching pad, if you will, that has enough scale to make it meaningful.
Part 3 of the third question.
Oh, gee.
Can you do it alone?
I bet, do you mean can MySpace do it alone, or?
The freemium, the paid content, whatever. Can you do it without the other guys joining you?
Yeah, okay, got it. Yes, now I understand the question, yes. Ultimately, it'll be tough, right? But I think we're prepared. As I said before, I think as a company, we're prepared to lead. I think that someone leads, and then I think we start to see a lot of things happen as a result, because there's a pent-up need for this. As people look at their business models. But I don't think, I ultimately think we're either right that there has to be a resolution of free versus paid, that in a world that encompasses both, or we're not, in which case, I don't know how people pay for a lot of things like bureaus in Kabul and news bureaus in Kabul and lots of things that I think are important, in which case, not only would it will be difficult not only for our company longer term, but many, many others, and I think a less rich world in terms of what it provides people. So I think the answer is no, but we're prepared to lead.
Two-part question. First, isn't paid content together with leaving Google total suicide? Because first, you talked about Twitter. I don't follow someone whose links I can't follow because I have to pay. So unfollow Wall Street Journal and Co. Same with Facebook. Second part of the question is, aren't you excluding yourself from the discourse in society? Because when the New York Times is stopping all print subscriptions for their editors, do you really believe they will put on new online subscriptions so that everyone can read this? Isn't this totally isolating yourself from the rest of the world?
As I said before, I think, and as Rafat phrased, I think if you look at what is going on with the Wall Street Journal today, right? It took them 10 years to get to a model today that works economically and works for customers and users, right? It has all of the above, by the way. It has economics behind it, it has users, and it has customers, i.e. people that pay you. It has all three. That is a good world, right? And I think the Wall Street Journal, though I don't know each and every newspaper, is as healthy as any newspaper and news organization as there is anywhere. And so I think what that says is it can work. Now the question is, for how many different organizations can it work? How many different organizations can produce truly differentiated and valuable content that they can make a model like that work? We intend to not only keep at the forefront of that, but to continue to make it work. And so, no, I don't think anyone's trying to cut themselves off from the rest of the world and disappear from the zeitgeist of life. And again, I think the Wall Street Journal, if anything, has improved its position by how it's conducted itself. And the model that
would
it's
a general news website be slightly more free versus less paid, and Wall Street Journal is more paid versus less paid?
Yeah, I think you have to figure out where the right balance is for the different specifics. And as I said, I was speaking last week in New York. If you may know, the New York Yankees won the World Series last week. I'm a Red Sox fan from Boston. But I was asked that question like that the next morning, and I said, I don't think anyone in the room is going to pay to find out the Yankees won the World Series last night. So I think that kind of thing, breaking news, is going to remain out there for the most part. The question is, can you also add different levels of value to that? And what are the forms that can take? And by the way, people are different, back to your question, people behave differently in a mobile environment. People are willing to pay for things in a mobile environment that they don't pay for on the web. And that's another aspect of this that I think is fast becoming a primary aspect of it. I think it's a broader discussion, but the mobile environment changes behavior. It changes it in this regard, and it changes it for the fact that people are willing to pay for ringtones. More for ringtones than they were for CD singles, right? Which I would have never in a million years bet on. So there's something happens in that environment that also people's perception of what's valuable is affected by a mobile environment, and their willingness to say, pay a subscription to have access to a whole bunch of music on the one hand, or a whole bunch of content and news and information on another. I think it may be different in that environment.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got an hour till the buses start taking us up the hill. So you're going to be around you're around for dinner, right, John?
I am.
So buttonhole away. And I want to just thank you guys both, Rafat and John, for coming. And
thank you.
The drill is, there are going to be buses to go up to the Hotel de Paris, leaving starting at 7:45 or so. And we're told that Her Royal Highness Princess Caroline, who will be our host tonight, is quite maniacal about scheduling. So we really got to be all there at 8:30 in our seats. And if you want to get yourself up there, you're obviously free to get the exercise up the hill. So off you go. Thanks.